Our gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11. I'll be reading verses 2 to 11. Hear this word of the Lord. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." Gospel of the Lord. Pray this morning that the words of my lips and the meditations of my heart will be acceptable and pleasing to our God, our rock, and our Redeemer. Early on in my ministry, I got invited to do a devotional at a meeting at a nursing home, at the local nursing home. And so I went to the nursing home, and and one of the residents of the nursing home came up to me and said, "It is so good to meet you. I hope I'm going to be seeing more of you." And I said, yeah. And I thought, wow, this is really going great. Being a minister, like I'm just making an impact on people, and I hardly have to say anything. And I got up and I did my devotional. And after the meeting was ended, he kind of came up to me looking a little bit sheepish, and he says, "I thought you were the new maintenance man." Are you the one? Right? We're in this season of Advent, and it is a season of waiting. It's a season of watching, but who are we waiting and watching for, right? Are you the one? Are you who I think you might be, or are you someone else? And it turns out that question of who we're waiting and watching for is a really old question. In fact, that's the one that John the Baptist sent to his disciples. They said, "Go ask that Jesus, my cousin, ask him, are you the one who is to come, or should we wait for another?" Who are you? Are you the one I think you are? And so here we are in this season of Advent. We're watching for the one who was and who is to come. And we watch for Jesus, but that watching is not easy. And even those who were close to Jesus, like John the Baptist, they weren't entirely sure what they were watching for. I mean, John and Jesus, they were cousins. They had grown up in the same circles. They both came from families who took their faith very seriously. And so John came from a priestly family, and his father Zechariah had gotten the news that John was going to be born while he was ministering in the Holy of Holies. And Jesus lived out a different kind of a holiness, right? A quiet 30-year holiness in Nazareth, working with his father and mother, while John went out into the desert to eat locusts and to wear camel's hair clothing and to be this coming prophet. But they're both people that you would maybe have imagined would known each other. And even, John, when he was baptizing in the Jordan and Jesus came to him, he said, "I ought to be baptized by you." So he knew something. But John must have still had his doubts, because he puts this question to Jesus. He sends his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we wait for another?" And maybe it was because John had the same vision of the coming Messiah that a lot of people in that age did, right? Maybe John figured that the Messiah would be a leader cut from the same cloth as the Maccabees of old. These guys that a couple of hundred years before John and Jesus had threw off their Greek overlords and reestablished temple worship in Jerusalem and started, they were in charge. They started even printing their own, or minting their own money. They made Israel generally great again until the Romans came along. So maybe John thought Jesus would kind of be that sort of a Messiah, a little bit like the Maccabees, this conquering Messiah, a Messiah with a sharp sword and a strong army. And so, there's John sitting in prison, maybe even wishfully hoping, a Messiah like that could bust me out of this place. Because you see, John the Baptist, he ended up in prison because he criticized Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. It was Herod the Great who had rebuilt the temple, but he was also the one who had done some pretty not great things, like trying to kill the infant Jesus, and in the process murdering all these infants in Bethlehem. And Herod Antipas, he had inherited his father's ruthlessness, and when John the Baptist took him to task for his affair with Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, Herod had John arrested and thrown into prison. And we all know where that story ends up, when Herodias' daughter, Salome, dances before Herod. She asks for a reward, and she doesn't want half the kingdom. She doesn't want gold. She wants something far worse, and she gets it. But that happens in Matthew 14, and in the passage we're in chapter 11, at that moment, John the Baptist is alive, though not well, because he's languishing in chains in Herod's dungeon. And apparently, he's in the dungeon, but his disciples, and he has disciples, people who are following him around and learning from him, they can get into the dungeon, and they can talk to him because they give him these reports. They tell him about cousin Jesus and all that he's up to, and John sends them to Jesus and says, "Are you the one who is to come? Are you who I think you might be? Or should we wait for another?" And if you look at this passage, you see how Jesus responds to him. And it's really Jesus' pattern. It's the way he responds a lot of times in his teaching. Jesus, when they come to him, they have a question, "Are you the one?" And Jesus uses another question, or a kind of a question, to put it to them, right? He gives them an answer, but it's not just stating it. He's inviting them to think it over. It's kind of like answering a question with a question, right? Well, what do you think, right? What do you see? That's often how he teaches, right? He asks that question to the Pharisees when they tried to put him on the spot. He says, "Well, whose head is on this coin?" Right? Answers the question with a question. Or the rich young ruler comes to him and says, "What do I need to be saved?" And Jesus says, "What have you read in the scriptures?" That's kind of his teaching method. Jesus uses questions to draw people out of themselves and make them think. Questions make them look at their own assumptions and kind of examine their hearts and think about how they see the world and really just reconsider. And so when John the Baptist's disciples ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we wait for another?" he puts that question back to him. It's in verse 4. He says, it's an answer. He says, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." That's his teaching style. And you see it. You see Jesus using questions all over. Even when he teaches in parables, parables are kind of like a story that's got a question at the center, right? It's like a question wrapped up in a narrative, right? That a parable leaves you with more questions. So even when he tells a story, there's not easy answers, right? A parable will poke you and prod you. It's more like a stick of dynamite than a sermon illustration. And so you hear Jesus' parables and you're left asking, like, what? Well, now what, right? So Jesus will tell, for example, a story about two sons. One of them gets the inheritance and leaves. The other one keeps his inheritance and stays. And who's the good one, right? It seems like it's a very nice story, but then it doesn't all add up. The older son has all this stuff going on, and the younger son has different stuff going on. Or Jesus tells a story about how a man hires people to work on his farm, and at the end of the day, he pays the people who started later the same amount that the ones that started earlier get. And so we're kind of left with this question, well, what do I think about that? Do I like that master of the farm? What do I feel about that free grace he just extended to all those people? So there are these questions wrapped in stories that undo our expectations as this story unfolds. And when Jesus responds like that, with a question or with a story, it's not that he's being evasive. I think it's just Jesus saying, in this case, look at the evidence, right? Look at what's going on, disciples of John, and tell me if this lines up with your understanding of the coming Messiah. I mean, and this goes all the way back to the prophet Isaiah, who 500 years before John and Jesus had prophesied in that passage that we heard today about the highway to Zion, and how the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped, and the lame will leap like deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. I mean, that was Isaiah's vision of how this people on the move will approach God's holiness and find joy and peace and healing and redemption on that highway to Zion. And it's the vision of what happens when the Messiah comes. And so Jesus is saying, you've got all that expectation. Here's what you see in my ministry. What do you think? Does that add up? And that expectation of the ancient prophets of the coming of the Messiah, I mean, this is what he puts to the test. Did the blind see? Well, yes. I mean, you look at Jesus' ministry, like Matthew 9, 2 blind men come to Jesus. He touches their eyes and their sight is instantly restored. Or did the deaf hear? Well, Mark chapter 7, they bring a deaf man to Jesus and he sticks his fingers in the man's ear. He actually licks his fingers first and sticks them in the man's ear. But then he hears, right? Or Matthew 8, right? Are the lepers cleansed? Yes. I mean, the man comes and says, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus says, I'm willing. Or are the dead raised? Well, Matthew 9, Jesus raises the dead. She's not dead, just sleeping, right? Or Luke 7, Jesus encounters this funeral procession outside of Nain, and he raises this young man. I mean, he raises Lazarus. Do the poor have good news preached to them? Well, I mean, he's done that in spades, right? Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the poor, right? They'll have good news preached to them. The kingdom is theirs. So what do you see, right? What do you see when you come and look at me? That's the question that Jesus puts to these disciples. I mean, yeah, he might be thinking, yeah, what do you see? I'm sure I'm the son of the carpenter, but I'm not your new maintenance man. What do you see? So Jesus' answer to John's disciples is, look at the evidence. Have I fulfilled those expectations in my ministry? It's not some kind of a theological response that's just hanging out there in space. I mean, it's Jesus saying, God's kingdom has broken in. The Son of Man is here and now. He's in history. He's born among us. He's walking among you. What do you see? And this season of Advent that we find ourselves in, it's a time to watch for all that. It's a time to watch for Jesus, right? What do you see? And the first place we got to watch for Jesus is in our lives, right? I think Advent's a really great time to ask the question, Jesus, what do you want me to learn from everything that I've experienced in this last year? Because, Advent, here we are in December. It comes at the end of our secular calendar. It's really the beginning of the Christian calendar. But look back. Jesus, where were you? Where did I see you? What do you want me to be learning from all that? And then, Jesus, what do you want me to do and be? And where do you want me to grow in this coming year? It's the season of watching and taking stock. I mean, ask some of those questions and just kind of see where that takes you. Because, the way that Jesus responded to John, that gives us a clue about how he will respond to us, right? He'll look at our lives and he'll say, look at all these things that have happened in the last year, these good things. That's where I showed up. He'll say, look at how I'm moving even in the world. That's where I was at work. And so Jesus is saying, take a look at that. What do you see? Are you watching? And so you got to watch for those signs of the kingdom within our own lives, but also watch for the signs of Jesus showing up within the world. Look for those places where the kingdom is breaking in, where we see renewed sight and we see restored hearing, and where new life is breaking out, and where good news is being preached to folks on the margins. And watch for those things. But part of what this means is that we have to learn to watch. Because we often can't. And we often get distracted by these other visions of where our lives are going and what history is doing, and where the meaning of the world is supposed to be found. I mean, Jesus said in verses 7-9, look at this, he says to the crowds, "What'd you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet." Right? He's saying, yeah, I know it. People of power, the ones that are wearing soft robes and living in palaces, yeah, I know that they're always trying to drag your attention their way. And yeah, I know, says Jesus, that it seems like those places of power are the real center of history, but I want to call you to something different. He's always trying to help us see what is real. Right? And Jesus is saying there's always going to be those who are trying to hack our attention and absorb our interest, right? The people in the palaces. The TV is going to blare forth news, and the risk will always be to focus on that world power, that money power, that political power, and believe that that is where the center of history lies, that is what matters most in the end, that's what's really real. But Jesus is saying, I know you are alert to the fact that there's something more, and that's why you're here. Advent's a season of watching for Jesus. And if we're going to watch for Jesus, if we're going to look for him in our lives and in our world, then we got to learn the art of watching. We've got to learn that skill. It's not easy, because those powers that be are attention hackers, and they're all over the screens. And the screens draw our eyes, and the screens hold our attention, and it can be hard to look away from the screens, and pretty soon we realize that we can't, right? And the problem is that we start to lose the ability to see what is real and what is right in front of us, because the screens want to teach us sneering songs of disdain, and they lift us out of the places that we find ourselves and from the people who surround us, and try to make us grit our teeth in anxiety and anger. I was a teenager in the 90s, and this movie came out called The Matrix. Maybe some of you know this movie, and I won't give away the whole movie, but part of what The Matrix really did was, I think, predict our world in some ways, right? It was this, it's this vision where it's all a simulation, and it's the story of people trying to break free from the simulation. And what really gets me is that there's this moment in the movie The Matrix where one guy says, "Put me back in," right? I've broken free and I see the world for what it really is, and I don't like it. Put me back in. And I think sometimes it feels like we're stuck in this vast machine for keeping us in a state of unwakefulness. Right? Like, sleep is one thing, unwakefulness is another. And sleep is good. Right? And you know how it is, you have a baby and everybody asks you, are they sleeping through the night? And that's such a cruel question. Because no, they're not, right? They're babies. They don't sleep through the night. They're supposed to wake up and they're supposed to eat, and they need help, and then they get bigger and they still need help, and they need a drink of water, or they get sick. And so are they sleeping through the night? No. I remember what sleep was kind of like, right? That sweet pre-children sleep. But as far as I know, you never go back to it. But sleep is good. Sleep restores the mind. Sleep can be a place to dream. But unwakefulness is something different. And I feel like so often we get trapped in unwakefulness, kind of moving through the world like zombies and looking only at the screens and not paying attention to what's going on and tuning out reality. And Advent is a season of waking up. Advent is a season of paying attention. What do you see? Jesus is saying people are seeing and hearing, and they're walking and they're being restored to community. The dead are coming back to life. Jesus is saying, I'm still doing that. I'm the same Jesus yesterday and today and forever, and I'm still at work. Do you see it? Right? It's so hard, I think, to learn how to see. Back in 1980, writer and farmer Wendell Berry wrote that we need to reclaim the home as a place of attention and interest. And Berry's number one recommendation for reclaiming the home as a place of attention and interest was to get rid of the TV, which sounds so quaint. Because not only did we not get rid of it, but now we're all like carrying little TVs around in our pockets, right? But Mr. Berry was not wrong, right? Those screens have surrounded our eyes and rubbed out our brains, and we've lost the ability to see and to watch. And maybe we can begin to learn that skill again. As Berry puts it, all that is necessary is time and inner quietness. Well, Advent's a time to learn to see again. It's a time to watch. It's a time to watch for Jesus and what he's doing and to reevaluate what's most important for us. And Jesus said in verse 11, he said, "Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." You see, John really straddles two eras. He's the last of the great prophets of the Old Covenant, and he's the forerunner of the New. And this is why Jesus says that even the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he, because he's saying anyone who finds their identity and life in him, in Christ, already possesses immeasurably far more than all of the prophets of the Old Covenant. But what's interesting about that statement is that it won't look like that. Because the kingdom always enters the world at a slant. John the Baptist is going to come, and he's the greatest of the Old Covenant, but he's wearing camel skin in the wilderness. And the new era will begin with the birth of Jesus, but he's going to come to this young, unmarried virgin who says yes to God's calling. And the one who cares for Mary and cares for Jesus is going to be Joseph, who makes a choice, an unlikely choice, to take Mary as his wife. It's going to be Magi, who are not part of the people of God, but who look up and learn to see and risk everything to find that newborn king. There's going to be those signs, and those same kind of signs are coming right here and right now, and people whose lives come into the contact with the kingdom, and they begin to stand up for what's right, and they begin to speak what is true, and people who encounter Jesus and who aren't afraid to get out of their comfort zones and to live the way of Jesus in a world that's a little bit sick and a little bit crazy and a whole lot of divided. They're not going to be people who make the news. They're not going to be on the screen, but they operate on their own time with inner quietness. People who are oriented by something different and who move through the world according to God's different path. And so we watch for Jesus in our lives, in the world, and there's going to be these kind of snap to consciousness moments where he just shows up and he does his thing and he surprises us. There's going to be moments of unexpected grace and that sudden presence of a great God in the face of huge tragedy. And the blind will receive sight, and the lame will walk, and the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them. And if you're watching, you'll see it. That was Jesus. And what all of these markers have in common is that they're all healing, they're all good, but they're all waking up and coming truly alive. It's all about people who are encountering Jesus, and suddenly the panorama of the real life unfolds before them. It's about being cleansed of stigma and shame and entering fully into human society. It's about hearing the word and being raised to new life and believing that your bank account doesn't determine human worth. It's about stepping into all of that and waking up to Jesus. And he's still waking people up. He's still calling us to watch and to see him. So this is a season of that watching. It's a season of pausing and breathing and seeing and listening. This season of Advent is a time of preparation for Christmas. It is a season of watchfulness, of Jesus entering into human history for the life of the world. And he's never given up on that. Jesus keeps showing up in people's lives and keeps inviting them to turn and to be changed and to come to him. Where Jesus is, the blind are still seeing, and the lame are still walking, and the impure are still being cleansed, and the deaf have their ears open, and the dead are still rising to new life. The poor still get good news because God is still at work, and he still wants to come into your life. And I don't know where you're at right now. I don't know what you're experiencing or what you're feeling. I don't know what you need. Do you need to see? Do you need to walk again? Do you need cleansing? I mean, maybe the shadow of death has sunk and settled over your life. Wherever you're at, whatever's churning in your life during this season, know this. The one who is to come is the one who comes right now. The one who was is the one who is the one who will be. Jesus, are you the one? Yes. And I hope to be seeing a whole lot more of you in this new year. Thanks be to God.